Clara Whitmore believed she knew the depths of her father's cruelty, but on that frozen morning in 1887, in front of the entire town of Silver Creek, Wyoming, he proved he could still wound her in a way she had never imagined. "Since you're so eager to defy me," Silas Whitmore declared, his voice carrying across the square, "you will learn the price of disobedience." Then he pointed at the tall man dressed in black who watched from across the street, Elias Blackwood, the cowboy everyone called Ruthless. "At sunrise, you will marry him." Clara felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. What she didn't know yet was that the man chosen to destroy her would become the only one willing to stand against the whole world to protect her. "Stay with me until the end," because something her mother hid 12 years earlier is about to expose the truth about this marriage, about the land, and about the man everyone feared. The trouble began an hour earlier, inside the town hall of Silver Creek. Winter was coming down from the mountains, and everyone knew what that meant. Snow that buried fences. Wind that could freeze a man between his barn and his back door. It was no season to be without a roof, which is exactly why Clara couldn't stay silent when she heard her father announce, in front of the town council, that he was evicting the Miller family from the land they had farmed for 11 years. "They're 4 months behind," Silas said, adjusting his silver watch chain. "Sentiment doesn't pay debts." Clara stood up, 28 years old, unmarried, a spinster, as the town ladies whispered behind their gloves, with auburn hair pinned beneath a modest bonnet and green eyes that had learned long ago to stay lowered. But not today. "Father, the Millers have 3 children. The youngest has whooping cough. If you put them out now, that child won't see spring." A murmur ran through the hall. No one spoke to Silas Whitmore that way, least of all his own daughter. "Sit down, Clara. I've seen the ledgers, Father." Her voice trembled, but it did not stop. "The Millers paid in August. I recorded it myself. That debt doesn't exist." The silence that followed was the kind that comes before a storm breaks. What Clara didn't say, what she couldn't prove yet, was that the Millers' payment wasn't the only thing missing from her father's books. For months she had been finding gaps. Money that arrived and vanished. Loans from a Cheyenne bank that made no sense. And one name appearing again and again in the margins in her father's cramped hand. V. Hale. Silas smiled at her across the hall. It was the coldest thing Clara had ever seen. He walked her out to the square, gripping her arm like a jailer, and there, before shopkeepers, ranch hands, and church wives, he raised his voice so no one would miss a word. "My daughter believes she knows better than her father. She believes she can shame me in public." "Very well." He turned slowly, theatrically. "No decent man has ever asked for her hand. She's 28 and sharp-tongued and no use to anyone. So I've found the only man in this territory who'll take her." That was when he pointed across the street. Elias Blackwood stood beside his black horse, motionless. 38 years old. Broad-shouldered, dark coat down to his boots, black hat shadowing gray-blue eyes. The richest rancher in the valley, and the most feared. They said he'd run 3 men off a cliff for stealing cattle. They said he'd broken a banker's jaw in Cheyenne. They said no woman had ever entered Blackwood Ranch and that no light burned in its windows after dark. Ruthless Blackwood. "At sunrise," Silas repeated, "you will marry him, and you will finally learn obedience." The crowd began to scatter, embarrassed, thrilled, already composing the gossip they would serve with supper. Clara pulled her father toward the shadow of the mercantile, her voice low and desperate. "Father, you can't mean this. You hate that man. Last month you called him a wolf in a Sunday coat. Last month I owed that wolf $4,000. Silas straightened his coat, and for one unguarded instant Clara saw it, the fear underneath the arrogance. "He holds my notes, Clara, all of them. Come spring, he could take this ranch down to the last fence post. So we've come to terms. He suspends the debt, I keep my land. And he takes you, which settles 2 problems for the price of 1. His lip curled. "You wanted to count my money so badly. There, now you know what you're worth. $4,000 and a mouth I'll finally be rid of." Clara stepped back as if he'd struck her. "I won't do it. I'm a grown woman. You can't drag me to a church." "No," Silas agreed pleasantly. "I can't." He glanced across the square to where Rebecca Miller stood outside the general store with a baby on her hip and a boy coughing into her shawl. "But I can put that family on the road by nightfall. Tonight, Clara. In the snow. The sheriff will do it on my word. You know he will." Or, he let it hang. "They can keep their roof through winter, their debt forgiven, on the day you say your vows." And there it was. The lever. Clara looked at the Miller boy, hunched and coughing in the cold. She looked at her father, who had learned exactly where her heart lived and how to hold a knife to it. "You'd trade a child's life to punish me." "I'd trade very little, actually," Silas said. "You'll find that's the difference between us. You care about everything. It makes you cheap." Clara closed her eyes. 28 years of small surrenders had led to this square this morning, this choice that was not a choice at all. "The Millers keep their farm," she said, "written and signed, before the wedding, and their debt burned, done. Then God forgive you, Father, because I won't." Silas was already walking away, and Clara stood alone in the middle of the frozen square, shaking, not with fear she realized, but with something new. something that felt almost like clarity. Then she heard boots on the packed snow. Elias Blackwood stopped in front of her. Up close he was even taller, and his face gave away nothing at all. She braced herself, for mockery, for appraisal, for the look men give livestock at auction. This was the man who had bought her, after all. $4,000 and a canceled debt. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat, and his voice, when it came, was low and quiet, meant for her alone. "Don't be afraid of me, Miss Whitmore. Your real enemy is not the man you're being forced to marry." He walked away before she could answer. Clara stood there in the wind, her heart pounding, and for reasons she could not explain. His words frightened her more than any rumor ever had, because they sounded like a warning. The wedding took place at dawn, in a cold little chapel with 6 witnesses and no flowers. Clara wore her mother's gray dress. In her pocket, folded small, was the signed paper protecting the Millers, the only wedding gift that mattered. Her father did not look at her once. When the preacher asked if she took this man, her "I do" came out as barely a breath. Elias's voice was steady. His hand, when he took hers, was warm, and gone the moment the vows were done. He did not kiss her. He only inclined his head as if sealing a treaty. The ride to Blackwood Ranch took 2 hours through country white with early snow. Clara sat in the wagon rehearsing every horror she'd been promised, and beneath the fear ran a colder current. He paid for you. Whatever kindness he shows, remember, he paid for you. The house surprised her first. It was large, well-built, with smoke rising from 2 chimneys, not the tomb the town described. A round-faced woman of about 60 came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, look at you, half frozen. I'm Martha, Elias's aunt. Come in before the wind carries you back to town." Inside, there was a fire. There was the smell of bread. There was, at the top of the stairs, a door that Elias opened himself, a bedroom. Warm, clean, with quilts on the bed, a lamp, a small desk by the window, and a key sitting in the lock. "This room is yours," Elias said. "The key is yours. No one enters without your permission, including me." Clara stared at him, certain this was some elaborate cruelty she hadn't decoded yet. "I don't understand. You paid $4,000 for me." Something flickered in his eyes. She couldn't tell if it was anger or pain, and it was gone too fast to study. "I forgave a debt," he said. "That's not the same thing. Money can buy a wedding, Mrs. Blackwood. It can't buy a wife. And I've never been fool enough to try." He stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "You'll have your own room, your own choices, and my protection. I will not lay a hand on you without your consent. If spring comes and you wish to leave, I'll put you on a train myself, with money enough to start over." "Why?" The word escaped her. "Why agree to this at all? A man like you doesn't need a wife he has to bargain for." Something crossed his face, there and gone, like a shadow over snow. "Get some rest," was all he said, and he closed the door, leaving the key on her side. Clara turned the key. The lock clicked then, because a lock made by a man can be opened by a man. She dragged the heavy oak chair from the desk and wedged it under the door handle. She sat on the edge of the bed in her mother's gray dress, in the house of the most feared man in Wyoming, and waited for the footsteps that would prove the town right. They never came. Near midnight, unable to sleep, she heard voices below her window instead. Elias and an older man out by the barn, their words rising with the wind. She cracked the window an inch. "You didn't have to take the girl to settle it," the older man was saying. "You could have taken the ranch. Lord knows Whitmore's earned it. And leave her in that house? With winter coming and hail circling?" Elias's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. "You weren't there 12 years ago, Samuel. Eleanor Whitmore stood in my kitchen with fever in her eyes and made me swear that if her daughter was ever in reach of Victor Hale, I'd put myself between them. I've broken a lot of things in my life. Not that." A pause. The wind. "Then Samuel, quieter, and the letter? You still think it exists? Eleanor didn't spend her last week alive telling me to protect it just for it to vanish. Silas never found it. He doesn't even know she came to me, and pray God he never learns. It's still out there, Samuel, and now her daughter is under my roof, and Hale knows it. The game just changed." Clara pulled back from the window, her breath white in the dark room. Eleanor Whitmore. Her mother, dead 12 years. Her mother had known Elias Blackwood, had stood in his kitchen, had made him swear, and her husband of one day was not just a stranger who'd forgiven a debt. He was a man keeping a 12-year-old promise, and a secret about her family worth hiding, worth circling, perhaps worth killing for. She barely slept, and when gray morning came and she finally pulled the chair away from the door and turned the key, she found something waiting in the hallway. A tray. Bread still faintly warm, butter, coffee gone lukewarm, set on the floor outside her door, hours ago by someone who had come and seen the door shut and asked for nothing. Clara stood looking down at that tray for a long time. The chair, she decided, could stay by the desk tonight. The first weeks at Blackwood Ranch taught Clara something unsettling. The monster of Silver Creek did not exist. She watched from her window as Elias spent an entire night in the barn with a mare that had gone lame, sleeping upright against the stall door so the animal wouldn't panic alone. She watched him pay his ranch hands on the first of the month, in full, before he paid himself. She watched him load a wagon with flour, salt pork, and firewood and drive it. Personally, in the bitter cold, to the widow Abigail Turner, who lived 3 miles down the creek and had no one. He's done it every winter for 9 years, Martha told her over bread dough one morning, and if you tell him you know, he'll deny it to your face. Then why does the whole town call him Ruthless? Martha's hands went still in the flour. Because 8 years ago, the Cattle Association tried to squeeze out every small rancher in this valley. Crooked weights at the scales, poisoned water claims, foreclosures built on lies. Elias stood up in front of all of them and called it what it was. Theft. He broke the association. Cost powerful men a fortune. She looked up. Powerful men own newspapers, child. They can't shoot a man like Elias. So they shot his name instead. Clara thought of her father, repeating those stories to her with relish. And she thought of something else, something that had been troubling her since the town square. Martha, the debt my father owed. $4,000. Why did Elias hold his notes at all? He doesn't lend money. Samuel told me he hates banks and bankers both. Martha was quiet a moment too long. That, she said finally, you'd have to ask him. And he won't tell you. That man would sooner take a bullet than explain himself. It's his worst failing, and Lord knows I've told him so. She went back to her dough. He thinks if he carries everything alone, no one else gets crushed by the weight. He's been wrong about that his whole life. Then came the night of the storm. It blew in fast the way Wyoming storms do, the sky green-black by 4 o'clock, snow falling sideways by 5. That was when little Tommy Reed, the foreman's grandson, was discovered missing. He'd gone after a runaway dog before the storm hit. The men saddled up. And Clara, who knew the boy loved the frozen creek bed because she'd walked with him there, didn't wait for permission. She wrapped herself in her coat and went out into the white on foot, calling his name. She found Tommy huddled under a cut bank, shaking, the dog in his arms. She got him up the slope and pushed him toward the lantern lights of the search party. But by then she couldn't see the lights herself. The world had gone white and roaring. The cold reached through her coat like fingers. Clara stumbled, fell, rose, fell again, and understood with strange calm that she was going to die a mile from a house full of people, and that her father would probably say she'd brought it on herself. That was when a shape came out of the storm. A black horse. A black coat. Elias, dismounting before the horse even stopped, crossing the snow in 3 strides. He didn't scold her. He didn't say a word. He tore off his own coat and wrapped it around her, over her coat, and pulled her against his chest, and she felt his heart slamming. This man of stone, this man who never showed anything, his heart was pounding like he'd run the whole way. I've got you. His voice was rough against her hair. I've got you, Clara, do you hear me? No one is ever going to abandon you again. Not while I'm breathing. And Clara Whitmore, who had spent 28 years being told she was difficult, ungrateful, impossible to love, pressed her face into the shoulder of the most feared man in Wyoming and wept. For the first time in her life, someone had come into the storm for her. After the storm, something shifted at Blackwood Ranch. Quietly, the way seasons shift, Clara noticed it in small things. Firewood, stacked outside her door on the coldest nights, though she never saw who put it there. A gentle bay mare appearing in the stable, surplus, Elias claimed, though Samuel later admitted the boss had ridden 2 days to buy the calmest horse in the county. And one afternoon, a wagon arrived carrying a crate of books, Dickens, Austen, poetry, and a small shelf that Elias installed in the parlor with his own hands, saying only, "Winter's long, a house should have books." He had noticed she loved to read. He noticed everything, Clara answered in her own quiet language. She mended the torn shoulder of his old coat so carefully he didn't discover it for a week. She reorganized the ranch ledgers, found errors the bank had made. In the bank's favor, naturally, and recovered $300. Elias stared at her figures a long moment. Then he did something no man had ever done. He asked her opinion. The Hendersons want to sell me their north pasture before the bank takes it. What would you do? Buy it, Clara said. At a fair price, not a desperate one. And let them stay on as tenants until they're standing again. Elias nodded slowly. That's what we'll do then. The word warmed her for days. When he fell ill, a fever, after 2 nights repairing fences in the sleet, it was Clara who overruled him, ordered him to bed, and sat by his side with cool cloths while he burned. In his delirium, he spoke a name. Daniel. Daniel, get back from the water. Later, Martha told her, Daniel, Elias's younger brother. A flooded river crossing 15 years ago. Elias had been holding his hand when the current tore them apart. He blames himself, Martha whispered. He decided that day that everything he loves, he loses. It's why he lets no one near. And it's why he never tells anyone anything. He thinks a secret carried alone is a secret that can't hurt anybody else, as if silence ever protected a soul. When the fever broke, Clara found Elias sitting by the parlor fire with a small wooden box open on his knees. Old letters, a boy's handwriting. He didn't hide it from her. That, she understood, was a door opening. He wanted to be a doctor, Elias said quietly. He was better than me in every way that counts. Clara sat beside him and, without letting herself think, laid her hand over his. For one moment, his fingers turned and wrapped around hers. Warm, strong, trembling very slightly. And the air between them felt like the moment before lightning. Then he pulled away and stood. Don't. His voice was gentle, which made it worse. You're grateful, Clara. Gratitude wears the same face as love until it doesn't. I won't take advantage of a woman who was given no choice about being here. He walked out into the cold, and Clara sat alone by the fire, her hands still burning, wanting to scream after him that she knew the difference, that no one had ever taught her love, but she was learning it now, from a man too honorable to accept it. That same night, unpacking the last trunk her father had grudgingly sent from home, her fingers found a seam in the lining, a seam that had been opened and re-sewn by a hand she recognized. Her mother's stitching, inside, folded to the size of a playing card, was a letter, and across the front, in faded ink, 3 words that stopped Clara's heart. For my daughter. Clara read the letter 3 times before her hands stopped shaking. My darling Clara, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I could not protect you the way I wished. Forgive me. I was not brave in life. Let me try to be brave in ink. The land your father calls his own is not all his. The Eastern Valley, the meadows along Willow Spring, came from my family. My father deeded it to me alone, and I have deeded it to you. Your father knows. When I fell ill, he brought papers for me to sign, papers that would give it all to him. I refused. So he found other ways. If a deed exists in the county records bearing my signature and the date of March, 1874, know this. I was in a sickbed in Laramie that entire month. The signature is forged. There is a spring on that land, Clara. Water that never fails, even in drought years. Men have already come asking about it. One man in particular, a merchant with a fine coat and hungry eyes. Do not trust him. Do not trust your father with anything you love. There is one man in Silver Creek I do trust, Elias Blackwood. The town tells lies about him. The town has always preferred lies to men like him. I have begged him to watch over what is yours. The proof? The true deed, I have hidden where your father would never think to look, because he never once opened it in all our years of marriage. In the place where I kept my faith. Be braver than I was, my love, your mother, Eleanor. Clara sat on the floor of her room until the candle guttered. The place where I kept my faith. She turned the phrase over and over and found no bottom to it. A church pew? A hymnal? Her mother's faith had lived in a dozen quiet places. Then she went downstairs, letter in hand, and found Elias at his desk. You knew my mother. He looked at the letter in her hand, and something in him seemed to set down a weight he'd carried for 12 years. I knew her, he said. She was the finest woman in this county, and she was afraid of your father and of Victor Hale. Hale spent years feeding Silas's debts, buying his notes, tightening the rope. He doesn't want your father's ranch, Clara. He never did. He wants Willow Spring. Whoever controls that water controls every ranch in this valley, mine included. Your mother came to me the winter she fell ill. She asked me to protect the deed's secret and to protect you, if it ever came to it. He paused. I looked for that letter for 12 years. I failed her. When your father came to me drowning in debt, and I saw Hale's hand on the rope, I bought Silas's notes myself, everyone, so Hale couldn't. And when Silas offered you to settle them, his jaw tightened. I said yes before he finished the sentence. It was the only way to put you somewhere Hale couldn't reach. And that's the only reason? Clara asked softly. A promise to my mother? The silence stretched. His gray-blue eyes held hers, and in them she saw the answer he wouldn't allow himself to speak. You should put that letter somewhere safe, was all he said. They agreed to ride to the county office in Cheyenne within the week, letter in hand, to demand an inquiry into the forged deed. They never got the chance. 2 nights later, Clara woke to breaking glass. By the time Elias reached the office, shotgun in hand, 3 ranch hands behind him, the window stood open to the snow, the desk was pried apart, and the letter was gone. The men had known exactly where to look. Elias stood in the wreckage a long moment. Then he began giving orders, low and fast, and that was when Clara heard it. Samuel, at first light, hitch the good wagon. Mrs. Blackwood goes to Cheyenne, my cousin's house on Ferguson Street. 2 men ride with her, armed. She stays there until this is finished. Clara stepped through the broken glass. Until what is finished. Elias, that letter names my land, my mother, my father's crime, and the men who took it burned barns for hire. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice, and for the first time that frightened her more than shouting would have. This is not a discussion, Clara. You'll be safe in Cheyenne. You decided this without asking me. I decided it to protect you. So did my father, Clara said quietly. Every lock he ever put on me was for my protection. Every door he closed. She watched him flinch and pressed on, because it had to be said. You opened the door of my room, Elias. It was the first free thing anyone ever gave me. But you keep closing every other door in this house before I can reach the handle. You bought my father's notes and didn't tell me. You knew my mother and didn't tell me. You've carried this fight for 12 years. And even now, your answer is to pack me into a wagon and carry it alone. Her voice broke and she let it. I am not asking you to stop protecting me. I am asking you to stop deciding for me. There is a difference, and until you learn it, you are only a gentler kind of jailer. The words landed like a blow. Elias stood very still among the broken glass, and Clara saw something she had never seen in his face before, shame. He said at last, hoarse, forget the wagon. But he didn't apologize, he didn't explain. He turned and walked out into the dark the way he always did, and Clara stood in the ransacked office. hugging her mother's memory to her chest, wondering if a man who had spent 15 years punishing himself for a river could ever learn that love was not a weight to be carried alone. 3 days later, Victor Hale would come to Blackwood Ranch while Elias rode the fence line, and he would bring with him a piece of paper that would use Elias's silence, every locked door, every secret kept for her own good. As a weapon against them both, Victor Hale came to Blackwood Ranch on a Sunday, when Elias was out riding the fence line, which Clara would later understand was no coincidence at all. He was elegant, apologetic, warm as a stove. He sat in the parlor turning his hat in his soft merchant's hands and told her he came out of conscience. "You deserve the truth, Mrs. Blackwood. 9 years ago, long before your marriage, your husband tried to buy Willow Spring from your father, and then, when Silas refused, through me." He laid a page on the table. The handwriting was strong, slanted, painfully familiar. "I want the Willow Spring parcel, Hale. Whatever Whitmore owes you, I'll double it. Name your price. E. Blackwood. He has wanted that water for a decade, my dear. When buying failed, he bought something else instead. Your father's debts, every note. And then, how convenient, the debtor's daughter, the true heiress of the very land he coveted, delivered to his house as a bride." Victor's voice was soft with sympathy. "I don't say he'll mistreat you. Men like Blackwood don't need to. He'll simply wait and be kind and one day set a paper in front of you and you'll sign it because by then you'll trust him. Ask yourself one question, Mrs. Blackwood. In all these months, has he ever told you he tried to buy your mother's land?" Clara looked at the letter. The handwriting was real. She had mended the coat of the hand that wrote it. She had held that hand by the fire. And he had never told her. He had told her about the debt only when her mother's letter forced it out of him. He had told her about Eleanor only when she stood in front of him holding the proof. Every truth she had ever gotten from Elias Blackwood had been pulled from him like a tooth. And here was one more, the oldest one, delivered by his enemy's hand. "You keep closing every other door in this house before I can reach the handle." She had said it herself, 3 nights ago, standing in broken glass. She just hadn't known how many doors there were. "I'd like you to leave now, Mr. Hale," she said. "Of course." He rose, gathering his hat, and paused at the door with perfectly measured regret. "Your father asks after you, whatever his faults, and they are many. His house is your house. A woman should have somewhere to stand that no man holds the deed to." When Elias rode in at dusk, snow on his shoulders, he found her in the parlor with the letter on the table between them and her traveling case by the door. He read it in silence, and Clara watched his face and prayed, to see surprise, confusion, outrage at a forgery. Instead, she saw recognition. "It's mine," Elias said quietly. "I wrote it 9 years ago." The honesty was so immediate, so unflinching, that it almost undid her. Almost. 9 years, Clara repeated. "You have known me for months. You watched me, read my mother's letter about that land with my hands shaking. You told me about the debt, about the promise, about Hale, and in all of it, you never once thought to mention that you tried to buy the very ground I inherited? Because I knew how it would look, how it looks," Clara said. "Is that everyone in my life has wanted something my mother left me, and the kindest of them simply had the patience not to grab." Her voice was shaking now. "I don't believe you're Victor Hale, Elias. I have seen your heart in 100 small things, and I know, there's an explanation. But that's exactly what breaks me, because you'd have let me learn it from him. You'd have carried it to your grave with all the rest, for my own good. And I will not, spend another lifetime being managed by a man who loves me too much to tell me the truth. Clara, I'm going to my father's house." She picked up her case. "Not because I trust him. I trust him less than any man alive. But it's the one place in this valley where I have never once been fool enough to believe I was safe. And right now, Elias, that honesty is more than I can say for this one." She was at the door when his voice stopped her, low and stripped of everything. "I tried to buy it to keep it from Hale. 9 years ago, he was already circling your mother's land. I didn't know then that it was yours, only that if his name ever touched that deed, every farm in this valley would kneel to him inside a decade. Buying it was the only way I knew to lock the door." A breath. "And I didn't tell you, because the day you read your mother's letter, I saw your face when you spoke of men wanting your land. I couldn't bear to stand in that company. So I said nothing." Again, his voice frayed. "You were right. In the office. I am a gentler kind of jailer. I've been locking doors so long I don't know how to live in a house with them open." Clara stood with her hand on the latch, tears freezing on her face, wanting more than anything in the world to turn around. "She didn't. Then learn," she said. "And when you have, you know where my mother's daughter lives." She walked out into the snow, and Elias Blackwood, who had let a river take his brother and a lie take his name without ever once weeping, sat down alone in the parlor where her book still lay open on the shelf he'd built, and put his head in his hands. At her father's house, the trap closed within the hour. Silas locked the parlor door, and Victor. Of course, Victor was there. Clara felt like a fool for half a heartbeat and then stopped, because she had walked in with her eyes open, laid a fresh document on the table, a full transfer of any and all claims to the Willow Spring lands, for the sum of $1. "Sign it," her father said, "and this family's shame ends tonight." Clara looked at the two men who had arranged her whole life like furniture and understood finally and completely the difference between them and the man she had just left. Elias hid truths to spare her. These men hid truths to spend her, and she felt something she had never felt in that house before. She felt unafraid. "No," Silas struck the table. "You ungrateful." "I have been called ungrateful in this house for 28 years, Clara said, rising, "for the crime of noticing things. I notice, Father, that you forged a dying woman's signature. I notice, Mr. Hale, that your kindness always arrives just before your paperwork. And I notice that the only reason this paper exists is that the real deed is still out there, which means somewhere my mother is still beating you. I will sign nothing. Ever." Victor's warmth peeled away like paint. "You'll sign," he said quietly, "or the notes I still hold on half this county get called in by Christmas. The Millers, the Hendersons, Widow Turner's mortgage, every family your bleeding heart has ever fed will be on the road in the snow, and they'll know whose signature could have saved them." Clara went white. And that was the moment the front door opened. Elias Blackwood filled the doorway, snow on his shoulders, Samuel behind him. He had ridden the moment Martha told him where she'd gone. Not to drag her back, but to stand between her and whatever she'd walked into. What he did next, Clara would remember all her life. He did not threaten. He did not raise his voice. He crossed the room, set a folded set of papers gently on the table before her, and stepped back, annulment papers. Signed on his side already. "You were forced into my house," Elias said, and his voice was low and steady and cost him everything. "You will not be forced to stay in it, and you will not be blackmailed out of your birthright to save it. Whatever you decide tonight, you decide free. These papers give you your own life, your own name, your own land, owing nothing to any man in this room, including me." His eyes held hers, and in front of her father, in front of his enemy, he opened the last door. "9 years ago I wrote that letter, and I should have told you the first night I gave you that key. I love you enough to let you choose a life that doesn't include me. I'm only sorry it took losing you to learn that loving you meant telling you everything, even the parts that shame me." The room went absolutely silent. Clara looked down at the annulment papers, the only gift of pure freedom any man had ever given her, and then at Victor Hale, whose face had gone very still, because a woman with nothing left to take from her is the most dangerous creature on earth. "Mr. Hale," she said pleasantly, "you should have let me keep believing my husband was a liar. It was the only card you had." And in that moment, looking at her father's house, this house where her mother had lived and prayed and hidden her courage in ink, Clara finally heard it, the letters riddle, unlocking like a key turning. "The place where I kept my faith, where your father would never think to look, because he never once opened it in all our years of marriage. Not a church, not a hymnal. It was here. It had been here all along, on the shelf in the front room, gathering 12 years of dust under her father's blind eyes." Her mother's Bible. Clara did not sign the annulment papers that night. She folded them into her coat, looked her father in the eye, and said, "I'll be taking my mother's Bible." Silas laughed, the first honest reaction he'd had all evening. Take the useless thing. He had lived beside the proof for 12 years and never once touched it. Eleanor Whitmore had known her husband to the bone. Clara rode back to Blackwood Ranch that same night, not to Elias's parlor, but to Martha's kitchen, where the two women sat by lamplight with Samuel standing guard, and Clara opened the worn black Bible to the Book of Ruth, her mother's favorite, and found the pages hollowed with a knife, and inside, wrapped in oilcloth, the original deed to Willow Spring, in Eleanor's maiden name, transferred to Clara Whitmore. With it, a sworn statement from the Laramie doctor confirming Eleanor's whereabouts in March of 1874, the month of the forged signature. Martha wept openly. Samuel took off his hat, and Elias, when Clara finally allowed him to be fetched, stood in the kitchen doorway looking at the deed, and at her, and did not cross the room. He had learned that much. He waited at the door she had not yet opened. "Tomorrow we ride to Cheyenne," Clara said to all of them, deliberately including him. "Judge Harmon, not the county sheriff. Hale owns him." "Harmon's already in Silver Creek," Samuel said slowly. "Came in on Thursday's coach. Word is he's been up from the Capitol 3 times this year, quiet-like, asking about Hale's notes in the county land office. Somebody's been writing him letters." Clara turned. Elias looked at the floor. 12 years of them, he admitted. "I couldn't find your mother's proof, so I sent the judge everything else I could, dates, filings, the pattern of Hale's foreclosures. It wasn't enough to convict. It was enough to make him watch." He met her eyes. "I'm telling you now, I'm trying, Clara. It wasn't an open door yet, but it was a hand on the handle. Victor Hale had one desperate card left, and he played it that very night." Clara woke to shouting and an orange glow through the frost on her window. The hay barn was burning, and the fire had been set at the corner nearest the horse stalls by men who knew exactly what choice they were forcing. Save the animals, and the house stood unguarded. Guard the house, and listen to the horses scream. Elias didn't hesitate for even a breath. "Samuel, the barn is yours. Every hand to the horses in the waterline." And then he was taking the stairs 3 at a time to the room where Clara stood at her window and his voice through her door was raw. "Clara, the Bible. They're not here for the barn." They stood together in the upstairs hall, Elias with his shotgun at the window, Clara behind him with the oilcloth package pressed to her chest and, in her free hand, the old hunting rifle from the study, held with a steadiness that made Elias glance back twice. "My grandfather taught me summers, when father wasn't watching," she said. "Eyes on the yard, Mr. Blackwood." A single figure broke from the shadows below and made for the porch, then stopped dead, caught in the light of his own fire, staring up at the window where the most feared man in Wyoming and his wife stood armed side by side. He turned and ran, and made it exactly 40 yards before two ranch hands rode him down into the snow. By dawn the barn was a ruin of black beams, but every horse was alive, and the man in the bunkhouse, facing a territorial judge who happened to be lodging 8 miles away, gave up Victor Hale's name before his coffee went cold. Elias stood in the smoking yard, a burn across one forearm he hadn't mentioned, watching Clara move down the line of shaken horses with a calm voice and steady hands. "Eleanor's daughter," he said quietly, and for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled. Really smiled. The hearing was held 5 days later, in the same town hall where everything had begun, Judge Harmon presiding, 3 years of his own quiet inquiry stacked on the table beside him, wanting only the keystone Clara carried in oilcloth. The whole of Silver Creek packed the benches. Clara stood alone before the bench. Elias, his arm bandaged, stood at the back of the room, and though it must have cost him dearly, he did not say a single word. This was hers. He had finally learned the difference between standing in front of her and standing behind her. Victor Hale's lawyer was smooth. He called the deed a forgery, the doctor's statement a fabrication, and Clara a disobedient daughter with a grievance. Coached by a husband who has coveted this land for a decade, we have his letter to prove it. Clara waited until he finished. Then she stood. "Counselor, you're quite right. My husband did try to buy Willow Spring 9 years ago from Mr. Hale at double the price the moment he saw Mr. Hale circling it. I invite the court to ask why a man would pay double to keep land out of another man's hands, and why Mr. Hale, who claims to be a simple merchant, was trafficking in claims to my mother's property at all." She let that settle, then turned to the bench. "But we needn't argue over motives, Your Honor, when we can settle a signature. Mr. Hale's man says my mother's deed is forged. Very well. There is a signature we can all test. The one on the deed my father filed. The county clerk is here. Sir, the date of filing? March the 9th, 1874, Dr. Whitfield of Laramie. Where was Eleanor Whitmore on March the 9th? In my clinic. She could not hold a spoon that month, let alone a pen. I have my records here." The hall erupted. Judge Harmon gavelled it down, examined the deed, the doctor's ledger, the arsonist's sworn statement, and 3 years of his own files. And because the trail had been laid stone by stone for a decade, he did what territorial judges did when the proof was already in the room. He ruled before sundown. The Willow Spring deed to Silas Whitmore, void and referred for prosecution as forgery. The lands, restored to Clara. Victor Hale, bound over for fraud and arson, his notes and holdings frozen by the court. Every family he had threatened, freed with one stroke of the pen, and through the noise. Clara turned, not to the judge, but to the benches, to the faces of the town that had watched her humiliation in the square and done nothing. "You called my husband ruthless," she said, and her voice carried to the back wall. "Ruthless, because he ruined the men who cheated your fathers at the scales. Meanwhile, you tipped your hats to these men." She looked at Silas, at Victor, who forged a dying woman's name and burned barns in the night. "Silver Creek believed the lie because the lie wore a fine coat. I believed it too. I married the only honest man in this valley thinking he was a monster, and found out the monster had raised me." As the hall emptied, Silas, stripped of the stolen land, facing charges, exposed before the town, whose opinion he had worshipped above his own child, reached for Clara's arm one last time. He had aged 10 years in an afternoon. "Daughter, you wouldn't leave your own father with nothing." Clara looked at his hand on her sleeve and gently removed it. "You'll keep the house and the land that were honestly yours, father, and I'll ask the judge for mercy on the rest, not for your sake, for hers. She managed to love you, somehow, and I won't shame her memory by learning hatred in her name." She stepped back. "But hear me. I am not doing this because I owe you. I am doing it because I refuse to become you. That's the difference between us." And Mother knew it. She walked out of the town hall into the winter sun, a free woman, a landowner, the wrong daughter of Silver Creek made right at last. And Elias Blackwood, watching her go, felt his heart break quietly in his chest, because she was free now, truly free. She had land, money, a name restored, and a signed set of annulment papers folded in her coat. She had told him to learn, and he had tried. But some lessons, he thought, come too late to matter. That night, he told Martha to make up the east rooms at Willow Spring, where the old homestead stood. A woman starting her own life would need her own house. For 3 days, Clara stayed in town settling the legal matters, and for 3 days Elias Blackwood did not sleep. He told himself it was right. He told himself that a man who loved a woman properly wanted her happiness more than her presence. He told himself he had known from the beginning how this would end. Everything he loved, he lost. Daniel had taught him that at a river crossing 15 years ago. On the fourth morning, a wagon came up the ranch road. Elias was on the porch before he could stop himself. Clara climbed down in her gray traveling dress, and his chest turned to stone. "She's come for her things." "Martha packed your trunk," he said, because it was the only sentence he could manage. "And the Willow Spring house. I had the men clear the chimneys. It's ready whenever." "Good," Clara said, walking up the steps. "You can unpack the trunk, and the Willow Spring house will make a fine schoolhouse." She went past him into the parlor, took the annulment papers from her coat, and tore them in half. Then in half again. Then she dropped the pieces into the fire and watched them curl into flame, and turned to face the man everyone called Ruthless, who was standing in his own doorway looking as though the ground had moved. "Clara, my father gave me to you as a punishment," she said. "Every soul in this valley believed I was being thrown to a wolf. I believed it. I put a chair against my door that first night, and in the morning there was a tray of bread in the hallway, left by a man who saw the chair and understood, and asked for nothing." Her voice trembled and she let it. "You gave me a key. You gave me a horse and books and firewood in the night, and my mother's honor back and my own name back. You are not a perfect man, Elias Blackwood. You hide things. You carry what should be shared. You decided for me, and it nearly cost us everything. And then you stood at the back of that courtroom with your mouth shut while I fought my own battle, and I knew you'd learned. The last door in this house is open." She crossed the room and took his weathered face in both her hands. "So now I'm choosing. Not gratitude, not obligation, not safety. I am standing in this room because there is nowhere on God's earth I would rather stand, and no man alive I love the way I love you. Locked doors, silences and all. Just promise me you'll keep learning." For a long moment, Elias didn't move. Then Clara felt it, a shudder going through him, 15 years of stone cracking all at once. "I loved you before you ever set foot on this ranch," he said hoarsely. "I loved you the moment you stood up in that town hall and set fire to your whole life for a family that couldn't pay you back. I've loved you every day since, and I'd have let you walk away loving you, because that was the only way I knew how to do it right." His hands came up to cover hers. "Teach me the rest, all of it. I'm through carrying things alone." "Then that's settled," Clara whispered. "Because I'm through being carried." And Elias Blackwood, Ruthless Blackwood, the man no woman had ever softened, laughed once, like something breaking open, and kissed his wife for the first time, in front of the fire where the annulment papers burned, while Martha, who was absolutely not eavesdropping from the kitchen, wept into her apron. They married again in spring, a real wedding this time, chosen freely by both, in a chapel filled with wildflowers and ranch hands and the entire Miller family, whose farm now stood on land Clara owned, and whose debt had died in Judge Harmon's courtroom. Widow Turner sat in the front row. Samuel gave the bride away. Tommy Reed carried the rings, with the dog he'd nearly died for sitting proudly at the chapel door. And when the preacher asked if she took this man, Clara Blackwood said, "I do," in a voice that rang off the rafters. If you rode through the Eastern Valley today, past Willow Spring, you would find a white schoolhouse, the old homestead, reborn, where children from every ranch in the county learn their letters free of charge, its waters shared by covenant with every farm the drought years used to break. Above the door hangs a small brass plate, the Clara Whitmore School. You would find Blackwood Ranch loud with life, a new barn raised by 40 neighbors in a single week, hands and their families, Martha ruling the kitchen, Samuel spoiling his grandson, and a gentle bay mare teaching a very small rider to sit tall in the saddle. And on most evenings, you would find the most feared man in Wyoming on his own porch swing, gray-blue eyes soft as summer rain, with his wife tucked under one arm, reading Dickens aloud, and a dark-haired baby daughter asleep on his chest. A little girl named Eleanor, after a grandmother who had been brave in ink, and whose love had outlasted every lie. He tells his wife everything now.
Yeah.
It took practice. She reminds him when he forgets that the bravest thing a strong man ever does is open a door from the inside. The town still calls him Ruthless Blackwood. Out of habit, Clara just calls him hers. And what about you? Would you have believed the rumors about Elias? Or would you have seen the heart hidden behind his silence? If you believe true love begins with respect, write love in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because tomorrow, another forgotten woman gets the ending she deserves.